Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Thursday, January 30th, 2025, and today we're talking about starting and planting peppers and doing some tarping tips for the spring. So let's do it. All right, happy Thursday and all that good stuff. I hope everyone is getting through their week and enjoying whatever it is that you all enjoy. I know several people listen to this podcast with a cup of coffee or tea in the morning every day, and I love that. It takes a fair amount of coffee to produce this show, so it's like a weird sort of solidarity. Yeah, awesome. So today I wanted to dedicate the show to sweet peppers, which sounds like the name of a pet, but is not yet. Anyway, I'm going to go through our process of starting the sweet pepper plants, potting them up, and then in the third segment, planting them. Now, I did a whole video about peppers that I will link in the show notes so that you can watch that to further flesh out what I talk about today. But what I like about adding these sort of, short casual talks about various crops is maybe I can inject something new into the conversation, but also maybe I can just present some of the information in a different way or a more digestible way, or maybe I'll just further complicate the process with too much information. Or all of the above. That's exciting. What I am not going to talk about today is about hot peppers and semi-hot peppers and things like shishitos. We'll save those for their own segment, but truth be told, the process is basically the same. It's just the spacing is a little bit different and the number of plants you need is slightly different. Like I definitely do not plant as many jalapeno plants as I plant sweet pepper plants, and hot peppers tend to come into production a little bit faster. So anyway, we'll talk a little bit more about chilies and all that stuff later. For sweet peppers, I always grow one bullhorn pepper and at least one bell. I don't really have a preference on the bell type. Ollie is good, Sprinter is solid. Those are both hybrids, so if you wanted a good open pollinated variety, I like King of the North. That works pretty well. I don't really grow any of those fun colors because I just don't have a market for them, but there's nothing wrong with them. I love those peppers. I sell the bells as green and then I sell them as red, but I don't grow the chocolates or yellows or any of those. I just haven't had the interest locally for them yet, though they did work fairly well when we did a CSA. So that's like a really easy way to start injecting some of those like slightly different colors and shapes and all that stuff. I also really, really love the lunchbox peppers, like the really tiny sweet peppers for their flavor, but their resemblance to hot peppers makes them a little bit complicated to sell at a farmer's market. Like you really have to hand sell them a lot of times. Some chefs will seek them out, maybe some retailers as well, but I would probably talk to those people before growing those particular plants. They just take a long time to get going. Awesome garden snacks though. Peppers in general are my favorite garden snack, and I don't even care if you tell the carrots. I kind of think they need to hear it. As for bullhorns, it's Carmen all day long. I've tried a lot of different bullhorn style peppers and just nothing quite beats the flavor of Carmen's for me. Second is probably the Jimmy Nardello or the Stocky Red Roaster. Those are really tasty. They are both a little bit smaller in diameter, especially the Jimmy Nardello than the Carmen, but they're just, the flavor's awesome, and they're also open pollinated. Carmen is notably a hybrid. And just a reminder that hybrid does not mean genetically modified. Hybrid just means they are two different peppers bred together to get an expected result, like an intentional mutt of sorts. All right, so for starting peppers, we use either 2-inch soil blocks, which is the 4-block hand blocker, or we use the 72 cell wind strips. Now, some people will use the mini blocks and then pot those up into the 2-inch blocks to save space and get better germination, which is fine too, but it just adds an extra step. And because it's often cold and the soil mix is often frozen this time of year, I prefer to just get all my soil blocking done for the next 2 weeks at one time, and then not have to get the mix like re-wet and all that stuff, a week later to get those small minis potted up to the 2-inch blocks. So yeah, for me, I prefer to just seed straight into 2-inch blocks and skip the mini blocks. We place 1 seed per block, but I will add a couple blocks with 2 seeds just in case there is a missing block somewhere. Then I can just pull one of those out and plop it into the empty block that didn't germinate. Anyway, when I'm seeding, after I seed them, I lightly cover that with a bit more dry soil mix just to hold in the moisture. Peppers germinate best around 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 26.6 Celsius, give or take a few degrees. So for us, we usually use a heat mat for that, but I've also found putting them in the same room as our hot water heater and furnace tends to do the trick nicely. Just after a few days, check on them twice a day for germination. and make sure that the soil mix stays moist. The heat mat is preferred, or even a germination chamber, but as long as you can get near that temperature and make sure those blocks do not dry out, I like a bottom watering tray for that personally, to ensure they don't dry out. And so long as you're also using good seed, germination should not really be a problem for peppers. It will take about a week for peppers, depending on the conditions, for them to actually pop. Then get them into a warm place like a greenhouse, protected from the cold, with plenty of sunlight. What you do not want is more heat than light once they germinate. So during the evenings, if they're on a heat mat, turn the heat mat down to ensure they don't grow and kind of get spindly, like leggy. Anyway, I think that's pepper starting. Enough for that. And we will finish out the seedling growing and then planting peppers in the third segment. But for the moment, we'll take a quick Patreon intermezzo of tarping, which when you put it like that, it doesn't sound the most appetizing. But here we are, BRB.
When your soul is lonely, sad and blue, ain't got no loving shoulders to lean on, there's always a sunny side across the river. Take a ride, take a swim, and all your worries go away. Go cross the river.
Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Harnois Greenhouses. Harnois Greenhouses has pioneered controlled environment agriculture since 1965, partnering with market gardeners and farmers across North America to deliver turnkey greenhouse solutions. Their unwavering mission is to support growers' success through innovation and expertise in design, manufacturing, and installation. Harnois Greenhouses are engineered to withstand high wind and snow loads, providing optimal brightness, increased yields, rapid ROI, and long-lasting durability. With over 20,000 projects completed, they are more than a manufacturer. They are a trusted partner. Their structures foster sustainable, energy-efficient ecosystems that drive profitable, resilient agriculture. In 2025, Harnois is introducing a new low-tech, high-tunnel model starting at just $2 per square foot, offering open field growers an accessible entry into controlled environment agriculture. Harnois Greenhouses, leading the way in turnkey solutions for local growers. Learn more at harnois.com. That's HARNOIS.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener, are enjoying this content, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes from Patreon member Nathan Leal Crisp, who writes, quote, "Awesome show. When is the right time to take off tarps for prepping soil for spring? My context is BCS raised beds, tarped for around 4 months. Bermudagrass appears completely dead. No more white shoots under tarp. Wood chips mulched paths are not filled yet and can't afford tons of compost. I haven't found lots of info about different ways to go about the situation like this that results in great success. FYI, still getting basic resources together and work is being done for nonprofit YMCA on 0.6 acres. Go Vols," end quote. All right, so great question, Nathan. And for those of you who don't know, the Tennessee Vols, Nathan's team, and my Kentucky Wildcats played basketball on Wednesday night in Tennessee, and, well, Kentucky got the best of them. Now, to be fair, Nathan probably could not have guessed this question would come into my queue 2 days later, and that was not intentional. So because I'm a nice guy and I appreciate Tennessee's defense, I won't spend the next 5 minutes breaking down the box score, but know that I'm a little bit tempted. Now, I do have to remember what your actual question was, which I think tarping, right? When to take those tarps off. Okay, so you said they've been on there for about 4 months. For Bermuda grass, I usually recommend longer. I would say closer to a year, but it depends on how much Bermuda grass, how strong it was, all those things. But if you are not seeing roots, that's at least a positive sign. How early you want to take those tarps off will depend a bit on what you need to do to the soil to prep it, to plant, if anything. If your soil is hard and compacted, which it probably will be under the tarps if you had nothing else there, give yourself a couple days to rake and cultivate it, probably with a stirrup hoe or wheel hoe. If it does not need much, if any work to be able to plant into it, then you don't really have to take it off until you plan to plant. It's keeping the soil in place, the tarp is, and weed-free at the moment, so no need to mess with a good thing if you don't have to. You could also pull the tarp back, add wood chips in the paths, as you mentioned, and then reset the tarp until you're ready to plant. If you did have a mulch you wanted to add, you could likewise go ahead and apply that, then reapply the tarp until you are ready to plant, which will keep the soil slightly warmer and keep that mulch or anything else in place. Some weed seeds are light triggered, so perhaps having the tarp off for a warm spell for a few days, maybe like we seem to be getting right here in our region this week, assuming you're in Tennessee, vacation home of the Wildcats, then putting it back might not hurt. There are truly 1,001 ways to go about this. For instance, if you need to do some broad forking to break through the compaction, you may want to remove the tarps, broad fork, and prep the soil, then replace the tarps for several weeks to let them kind of deal with any weed seeds that you've sort of newly released. For us, I have a handful of beds that have been tarped since the fall, but they had compost mulches. So I will simply pull the tarps back and plant almost immediately with almost no preparation needed beyond maybe a little raking just to sort out whatever the moles and voles or whatever were up to underneath there. I actually like what they do to the soil generally because it adds a nice little tilth and aeration. And they eat some of the pests that may be there, and it keeps our snakes happy at warmer times, but sometimes it can get a little messy. I will also at that time reseed my living pathways with Dutch white clover. Usually the residue from the previous season is enough to keep it from getting muddy, and also not all of those perennials will die just from one winter of tarping. Not usually. Stuff bounces back, which is why a full year of tarping is usually required or recommended to get rid of most difficult perennial weeds and grasses like Bermuda and Johnson. If I was doing wood chips, though, like I said, I would do that now because there's a little extra time, generally, while it's slow, and then replace the tarps. Anyway, a lot of this will depend on your context and how much time you have to prep the beds. Generally, you don't want to just pull the tarps off and let the beds stay exposed to rain and potential erosion for no reason. Keep it covered as long as you can before planting. All right. I don't know if that's entirely helpful or entirely answers your question there, Nathan, but I appreciate the question, and go Cats. Up next, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll finish out our peppers. Be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Peaceful Heritage Nursery. If you're looking for hardy and resilient fruit trees, berry plants, or pawpaw trees, then check out Peaceful Heritage Nursery. Peaceful Heritage Nursery LLC is a mail-order nursery shipping premium quality fruit trees and berry plants across the USA. They specialize in resilient, non-GMO plant genetics for small growers. Their diverse selection includes berries, cold hardy figs, passion fruit, gumi, mulberry, and much more. They're famous for their diverse selection of premium quality grafted pawpaw trees. 5-star Google ratings and customer testimonials attest to their commitment to excellence in quality and service. Find them at peacefulheritage.com and join their mailing list. Once again, find them at peacefulheritage.com. Use the promo code NOTILL, all caps, one word, for 10% off your first order. All right, back to the show. All right, so let's finish up on the peppers. When we last saw our peppers, they were just sprouting and we had moved them to a sunny, warm spot in the greenhouse or under grow lights or whatever. Now, I'm not a grow light guy, so I will leave that to the grow light people. But if you do grow under grow lights, just expect to have to harden off the plants fairly well before planting to get them used to regular sunlight and weather. Usually this happens in stages where you're putting them increasingly into more intense, more like natural environments. Anyway, at some point, well before they are likely ready to be planted, the plants will overgrow their trays and soil mix. A 2-inch by 2-inch block will only sustain them nutritionally for so long. You can add fish hydrolysate and other nutrients to help, and I will actually talk a bit about how to do that tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. Or I never ask you all to subscribe, but it probably doesn't hurt to ask you to subscribe and like the video and stuff. But so yeah, you can do that if you want. But at some point, the peppers will overcrowd the tray and be at risk of disease issues. So you can either place the plants in larger pots of soil, usually 4 or 5-inch pots, or if you're doing soil blocks, you can use the 4-inch single soil block maker. Or I like the soil balls, which again, are not for everyone and not some amazing innovation. They're just faster and more practical for us, and I like making soil balls because it's fun and easier on my body than the hand blocker that I own. Slamming those blockers into the soil over and over again is kind of rough on my shoulders. So anyway, I kind of like making the balls. It doesn't really matter. They seem to perform relatively the same, if not exactly the same. No matter which way you choose in terms of potting up, the idea is to give them more growing medium to utilize and more space for their leaves to breathe. Then obviously continue growing them until you are past your last chance of frost, or about 4 weeks before that point if planting in an unheated greenhouse or high tunnel. If you are wanting to grow the peppers intensively, you can go as close to a foot apart or less in the row. That will just require some pruning and to keep the airflow high and a lot of irrigation to ensure they have the moisture they need to grow and produce decent sized fruit. That density will also require additional fertilization like top dressing with good compost and or fertigating through the drip lines. That is pretty common in tunnels or in much of California where the outdoors is basically a natural greenhouse. Also, trellising will be essential in tunnels for any intensive spacing in the field, and you could prune them to a double leader system, meaning 2 like main stems, to maximize that space and effort. As for the field, at least here in humid Kentucky, when I went to visit my buddy Jeff Poppin in northern Tennessee this past summer, he had his peppers spaced around 3 feet, I think, apart, with no trellising at all. And I want to play around with that a bit myself this season just to see what I could get away with there, because any amount of work you can reduce is helpful, not just in profitability, but in like morale. But also trellising complicates harvesting because the strings often tangle up the fruit. So perhaps there is a yield trade-off, but a labor and supply saving gain by giving them more space between plants and not trellising the peppers. And as I always say, peppers are a good one to interplant with. So in theory, the extra space could be utilized for a quick high value crop like lettuce, which would make that unused pepper space, when you're spacing them further apart, less of a financial hit. I've started to plant peppers a little bit deeper into the soil to help with stability as well, but I've not gone without a trellis before. So we'll see on how all that works out. Anyway, more on peppers as we get closer to actually planting ours. And you can always go back and watch that video that I mentioned that I will link in the show notes. But for now, I'm going to call a wrap on this particular Thursday. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the team at No-Till Growers. Also shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music you are hearing now. I don't always know what that music's going to be. I generally pick it after I've done this part. But anyway, pick up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook that I wrote or The Seed Farmer by Dan Brisebois at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Click the QR code that you see on the screen somewhere to follow the link to apply to be the producer/editor of this show if you already live in Kentucky, or there will be a link in the show notes. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or sign up in the month of January, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs today to Marjorie Williams and Bob Penny. Marjorie and Bob are competing archaeologists, clearly, in Colorado, and they are both working on the Dinosaur Freeway, what's affectionately referred to as the Dinosaur Freeway. And they both simultaneously discovered the same unknown dinosaur species. And it's a big deal, probably. But this story is about the very slow, methodical hilarity that ensues as they both race to publish their findings. Oh, scientists. All right. Anyway, thanks for listening and or watching. We will see you tomorrow for Feedback Friday. Should be fun. So leave some feedback on this video so I have something to talk about. All right. Thanks for watching and or listening. Bye.